Hello, everyone. Welcome to Kudlow. I'm Larry Kudlow. I want to begin tonight with Save America, Kill the Bill. But in this case, it's not BBB. It's a downsized big government socialist bill called the Competes Act. It isn't $5 trillion, but it is $350 billion coming out of the House, following a $250 billion bill out of the Senate. It will move to conference. It's a terrible waste of taxpayer money for industrial policies, corporate subsidies, more Green New Deal spending, more unionization, more central planning and controlling by the federal government in Washington, D.C. This bill has nothing to do with competing with China or anybody else. In fact, the trade part of the bill actually undermines the Trump Phase 1 China trade deal, which did make us more competitive. Now, take a listen to a brief exchange between my pal, host David Asman, and Senator Todd Young of Indiana earlier today on Fox Business.
I'd say kill the bill, as Larry Kudlow would. I don't think there's any way that you can get the pork out of this one. Senator, we got to leave it at that.
Xi Jinping is lobbying against the legislation, so you and he seem to see eye to eye on this.
Whoa, yeah. Excuse me, Senator, no. I just don't like corporate welfare.
Yes, David Asman's 100% right. So Todd Young lashes out at Dave Asman, saying that he, Dave, and Xi are allied against the bill. No, they're not. It's a cheap shot by a senator who's a former naval officer and ought to know better. What this bill really is the Be More Like China bill. Mr. Young is not opposing China. He is emulating China and their socialist, centrally planned, state-run economy. Mr. Young apparently spent time in business, but he must not have learned very much. And by the way, 17 other Republicans are in exactly the same boat. Here's a quick story. President Biden was in the White House today promoting a new Intel plant outside of Columbus, Ohio. And then Biden said, well, if we pass this Compete Act, we'll have much more like this. But Intel invested $20 billion of its own money to build the plant and create high-paying jobs, and good for them. What's more, they say they're going to park up to $100 billion total over the coming years to complete the project. Good for Intel. But here's my point. It was Intel's private investment, not government subsidies. There may have been some state and local help, but that's different than a $50 billion federal subsidy or a $350 billion federal spending bill. Dr. Kelvin Drogemeyer, my pal, former director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy and a former head of the National Science Foundation, Kelvin tells me that the American private sector has invested $200 billion in the semiconductor space, and it's not over yet. So we don't need $50 billion from Uncle Sam with Lord knows how many woke and racial strings attached. Nor do we need $45 billion for another Energy Department slush fund. Nor do we need another $78 billion for the National Science Foundation, which has an $8 billion budget presently and couldn't possibly process something 10 times that amount. Nor do we need another $45 billion for the Commerce Department to finance something called critical goods, whatever that means. Nor do we need another $3 billion for solar manufacturing. Does anyone remember Solindra? Nor do we need $8 billion going to the UN Green Climate Fund. Whoa, the UN Green Climate Fund. Senator Young, congratulations. If you can tell me, Mr. Young, how any of these massive federal subsidies controlled by government bureaucrats made up mostly of former egghead professors who have never worked a day in their life in the private sector. If Mr. Young can tell me or my pal David Asman what this stuff has to do with competition, well, I welcome him to come on this show and explain it to me and our viewers. And by the way, there's a little more. Speaking of Intel and private investment, Intel's also building 2 factories in Arizona for $20 billion. Their money. Taiwan Semiconductor is building in Arizona for $12 billion. Chip maker Samsung building in Texas for $17 billion. Now, they may have some state and local help, okay, but it's basically almost all private money, private investment money. No federal subsidy with various regulatory strings attached. Because you know what? In our system, if it pays to invest, then capital will shift to take advantage of high market returns. That's called free enterprise capitalism, Senator Young. Now, let's think about increasing these market returns. Well, instead of $350 billion in federal spending, which, by the way, is not paid for by tax hikes or other spending cuts, and I don't want to pay for any of it anyway, but we could make the Trump tax cuts permanent because they would start to expire in the next couple of years. That increases the rate of return. Those tax cuts made America super competitive, and they're a great success for working families and minority groups. We could stop the Biden regulatory and tax assault on American businesses. That would make us more competitive, wouldn't it? We could think of America First as the most hospitable investment environment in the world. That would allow us to win the global race for capital and production. Just a thought. But $350 billion so we can be central planners and state-run economy controllers just like China? That's not the answer, Senator Young. Now, as always, sir, in the spirit of civility, respect, open dialogue, not to mention First Amendment freedom of speech, you are invited on this show anytime, Senator, to discuss your bill. But I'm telling you, I aim to kill the bill and save America.